Marketing Specialist Daniel Sloan, and today we are bringing you research ethics from an IRB perspective. Today's session will be led by Dr. Bernice B. Ramallah. Dr. Ramallah is the program director for the Doctor of Philosophy in Health Sciences degree program and professor of health sciences within the College of Health Sciences. She is also chair for the Culture of Research and Education C.O.R.E webinar series, a new innovative series aimed at developing participant, academic, and professional toolkit through continuing education. Dr. Ramallah earned a PhD degree and 3 master's degrees from Columbia University in New York and a certificate in clinical and translational science from the Rockefeller University. She has also served as a Fulbright Fogarty Fellow and National Institutes of Health C.R.E Fellow. Dr. Ramallah's professional and research interests include creative, innovative leadership, social determinants of health and education equity, multidisciplinary collaborative scholarship, programmatic development, evidence-based strategic leadership, and organizational change. Learn more about this series at trident.edu/webinars/C.O.R.E, C-O-R-E. Before we start, a few things to keep in mind. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please submit it via the question box or email it to me at daniel.sloan, that's S-L-O-A-N, @trident.edu. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the session. The session will be recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the webinar and a copy of the slides. And now, here's Dr. Ramallah.
Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone, to another C.O.R.E webinar series. It is my pleasure to introduce our 2 outstanding speakers for today, Dr. Stefan Hansen and Dr. Heidi Sato. Dr. Stefan Hansen earned his PhD and MBA degrees from New York University and is the program director of the Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, Bachelor of Science in Human Resource Management, and the Bachelor of Science in Leadership programs at Trident University International. Dr. Hansen is also an attorney, having earned a JD from Chapman University, and he is a member of the California State Bar Association. Dr. Hansen has taught at New York University, the University of Maryland at College Park, Chapman University, and elsewhere. He has also worked as an attorney in private practice and as a business consultant. Dr. Hansen has published in the areas of strategic decision-making, entrepreneurship, and international business, among others, and he has made numerous academic conference presentations across a wide range of topics in management. Dr. Hansen has also served on the Chapman University IRB committee while teaching there, and he is currently a member of the Trident University IRB committee. Welcome, Dr. Hansen. And Dr. Heidi Sato received a Bachelor's of Science in Nutrition and Food Science from the University of California, Berkeley, a Master of Public Health from Columbia University, and a PhD from Trident University. Her dissertation is entitled Risk Assessment Model to Predict Foodborne Outbreaks at Restaurants. Prior to receiving her doctoral degree, she worked for 15 years as an epidemiologist for Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. In 2000, Dr. Sato became a professor for the College of Health Sciences at Trident University and taught epidemiology, research methodology, and advanced statistics courses to graduate students. She also chaired a number of doctoral dissertation committees. In 2012, she became the co-director of the Master of Science in Health Sciences program and managed the curriculum development, program review, and teaching within the program. In April 2013, she was appointed Director of the Institutional Research and Chair of the Institutional Review Board. She has been the recipient of a number of awards for her data analysis and research, including one from the American Public Health Association for her research involving the development of a mathematical model for predicting outbreaks. She also served as an expert witness on data methodology and analysis for a high-profile case. Welcome, Drs. Hansen and Dr. Sato. Again, all participants are encouraged to submit questions during the presentation, since there will be opportunities to ask at the end. And without further ado, here are our outstanding presenters for today, Drs. Hansen and Sato.
Thank you, Dr. Ramallah. So today we're going to be talking about what is an IRB and its purpose, what requires IRB review and approval, what are the different types of IRB review, what is the process for submitting an IRB application, what criteria must be met for IRB approval, and what are the possible outcomes of an IRB review. So Dr. Hansen will be covering the first three agenda items, and I will be covering the last three. And so to start with, we have a poll question for you. So which of the following agenda items is the most important that you would like to have covered in this webinar? Select from the following. A, what is an IRB and its purpose? B, what requires IRB review and approval? C, what are the different types of IRB review? D, what is the process for submitting an IRB application? Or E, what criteria must be met for IRB approval? So we'll be waiting for your poll answers. So everybody completed the poll? Okay.
The poll will be closing in a few seconds.
Okay.
We have about 80% who have their votes in.
Okay.
And Dr. Sato, if you'd like, I can share the results with the participants or just read them out. It's up to you.
Go ahead and share them.
Sure. And they're on the screen now, and 38% said what criteria must be met for IRB approval. 28% what is an IRB and its purpose, and 21% what requires our IRB review and approval. And both at 7% what are the different types of IRB review, and what is the process for submitting an IRB application.
Okay, so what requires IRB review and approval was it the biggest one?
At 38%, the largest amount was what criteria must be met for IRB approval.
Okay. All right. Am I on live now?
Yeah,
so,
you are.
Okay. So it seems like the biggest interest was what criteria must be met for IRB approval. So this is the item that we'll try to be focusing a lot on this presentation. So thank you for your input. Very important to us. So going on to the next poll question. The true or false, as long as a researcher does not obtain data directly from human subjects, then the study would always be considered as research that does not involve human subjects. So mark right now, poll true or false.
The poll is currently live and will be up for approximately 30 seconds.
Okay, and we're just, yeah.
Will you see theirs?
The poll is now closed with 86% voted.
What was the percentage again?
79% said false, 21% true.
Okay. I'm live. Okay, so the poll has come back. 79% of you said false, and the rest said true. So it looks like excellent. Looks like most of you have got this correct. Yeah, because it's not just obtaining data directly from human subjects. There's a possibility if you're obtaining, for example, existing data that might contain health information, medical records. That information is still being obtained from human subjects, but it may not have been collected directly from the researcher. It could have been accessed as existing data. So that would still be considered involving human subjects. So excellent. So from here, we're going to go on to the first agenda item, and I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Hansen.
Okay. Our next topic is what is an IRB and what is its purpose? And like any institution that receives federal funds and conducts research, Trident University has a standing committee known as the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. This board exists for the protection of human subjects and requires those students and faculty conducting research involving human subjects to submit their research proposals for review. Among others, the charge of the IRB is to ensure adherence to federal, state, and local regulations, as well as established ethical principles, including respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, as enunciated by the Belmont Report and the United States Department of Health and Human Services. To give you a little history, in the United States, when the news that researchers had deceived and withheld treatment from subjects who suffered from syphilis in the famous Tuskegee study led to the creation of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. That's commonly called the National Commission or the Commission. The Commission was charged with establishing a code of research ethics for U.S. research involving human subjects. In 1979, the Commission issued the Belmont Report, the foundational document of the current system of U.S. human subjects protections. The Belmont Report outlines 3 key ethical principles for conducting research with human subjects: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. The Belmont Report, in turn, informed the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Code of Federal Regulations, and this is where you will find the regulations concerning the IRB. It's 45 Code of Federal Regulations 46, and this has been revised several times in the last years, but in 1991, there's Part A of these regulations, called the Basic Health and Human Services Policy for the Protection of Human Research Subjects, was adopted by 15 federal agencies, and that became known as the Common Rule. So those are 2 terms or phrases that you might hear in your research: the Belmont Report and the Common Rule, and those are the 2 foundational documents or studies that inform the work of an institutional review board. Let's talk a little bit about the 3 ethical principles from the Belmont Report. The respect for persons. The ethical principle of respect for persons includes the requirement to recognize persons as independent beings capable of voluntarily deciding whether or not they choose to participate in research. The key terms there are independent beings and voluntarily deciding to participate. The IRB addresses issues of safeguarding individuals unable to make informed decisions also, such as children or those not competent to understand the benefits or risks resulting from the research. The IRB also, under this heading, considers procedures to ensure confidentiality of subjects, and in research involving children, for example, the federal guidelines require that a researcher obtain parental consent and assent from the child, from the minor. What is beneficence? Beneficence regarding research is concerned with protecting subjects from harm and acting in the best interest of research subjects. The IRB, in order to prevent harm, the IRB requires researchers to consider and analyze the risks and benefits of a study and address them individually. The IRB has a responsibility to determine if the potential risks and benefits are clearly spelled out for the potential subjects, and whether the research can be improved based upon the listed risks and benefits. And then finally, justice. Justice is an ethical principle that requires that people be treated fairly. Subjects have the right to be aware of the potential risks of research when they're asked to participate, and the principle also requires that the IRB consider who or which group will benefit from the proposed research. The IRB needs to ensure that the potential risks are not being taken by only one segment of the population for the benefit of another segment of the population. So those are some examples of how those ethical principles can be applied. The membership on the IRB committee is relatively straightforward, but it gives you an idea of how the research is reviewed and considered. Federal regulations require that an IRB have at least 5 members with professional expertise and competence, and that they be of diverse backgrounds from the community and representative of the community, knowledgeable of community standards, etc. Here at Trident, our IRB consists of the Director of Institutional Research, the Chair, who is Dr. Sato, our Institutional Research Analyst is a permanent member. Then we have 4 representative faculty members, and at least one of those faculty members has to meet the federal definition of a scientist. And then we have 1 non-scientist staff member, and we have, right now we have more, but we must have at least 1 community member who's not affiliated with Trident. And then our Chief Compliance Officer is an ex officio member of our IRB committee. All right, so now let's go on to what requires IRB review and approval. The key phrase here is research with human subjects. And within that, you've got research and you've got human subjects. So research with human subjects requires IRB review and approval. Research means a systematic investigation. And by a systematic investigation, we mean something that has like sort of a research plan, okay? And it includes research development, it includes pilot studies, it includes preliminary studies, it includes testing and evaluation, and all of those things are designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. And a key phrase there is generalizable knowledge. So an example to help you get at of what is not research might be, let's say the library decided to do a survey of library patrons. You know, how do you like our library services, or you know, how are the library hours, or something like that. That wouldn't be really considered research. And the reason it wouldn't really be considered research is because the person who's asking those questions does not have the intention of contributing to generalizable knowledge, the overall body of scientific knowledge. So not all, for example, surveys are research, but if you're a doctoral student, for example, you will be doing research. And so in the main, what we're talking about here is called research. And then let's go on to where we talk about human subjects. What do we mean by that? And these definitions are, of course, taken from the federal regulations or the common rule. Human subject means a living individual about whom a researcher, whether professional or student conducting research, obtains the following: data through intervention or interaction with the individual, or an identifiable private information. And what's important here is to understand that the definitions involve gathering information or data about intervention or interaction with an individual when that individual can reasonably expect that what they're doing would be otherwise private or sensitive, okay? And then similarly with the identifiable private information, that would be information where the research subject can be identified by the researcher. So there's some individually identifiable marking in the research that permits the researcher to identify the individual. And that's when we have human subjects. So research with human subjects requires IRB review. So what are the different types of IRB review that a research with human subjects might be subject to? If the project meets the definition of research with human subjects, then it is subject to IRB review. And the next step, what type of review? There are three categories of IRB review. There is exempt, expedited review, and a full or convened IRB review. Let's talk first about exempt research. An institutional review board, or IRB, can determine that some research with human subject is exempt from IRB review when the research involves educational settings. So something involving educational testing can often be designated as exempt, or tests or surveys or observational research, especially when that has de-identified data or anonymous, for example, data collection. And similarly with existing data, especially de-identified existing data. Those are some categories of exempt research. Expedited review is the type of review that most of the research that a university IRB committee will deal with when dealing with research with human subjects. And this is research that poses no more than minimal risk to subjects. So if your research with human subjects poses no more than minimal risk to subjects, it is eligible for expedited review. What do we mean by minimal risk? Well, here's the definition from the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 45 CFR 46.102I. The probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research are not greater in and of themselves from those ordinarily encountered in daily life or during the performance of routine physical or psychological examinations or tests. So there are many types of research that are eligible for expedited review. Studies involving surveys, focus groups, interviews, observations of behavior, even studies involving collection of biological samples or data by non-invasive means, sort of taking someone's blood pressure, could be considered under expedited review. Now, when we have expedited review, usually what happens is the IRB committee chair or a designee on the committee will do the review and will report out to the rest of the IRB committee, but it's not reviewed by the entire IRB committee. And Dr. Sato is going to talk more about these process details when we get to her part of the presentation. But just to give you the distinction. Now, the highest level or the most thorough level of IRB review is this last one here, the full or convened IRB review, where the entire committee reviews that. And that is can vary from one IRB to another, but it's usually if research involves more than minimal risk. And even if it does involve only minimal risk, if you have sort of a protected group in there, what do I mean by that? Well, something involving children might, at Trident, that would definitely go to the full convened IRB committee to ensure that all the proper safeguards and procedures are there. So this allows, when we have a full or convened IRB review committee, and again, I don't want to anticipate too much what Dr. Sato is going to talk about, but when we have the full committee, this allows the diverse, input of the larger group and the different perspectives that we can take on the research. Okay, so I think we're going to a poll question now, aren't we?
Yes. Okay, so it's time for a poll question now. So which of the following would be considered exempt? A, any study that involves existing data or involves only existing data. B, a primary researcher surveys children in a school setting. C, an anonymous survey conducted on healthy adults. either involving a previous medical condition or about a health issue. D, any study that involves minimal risk, or E, studies in which participants provide informed consent. So mark your answer on the poll.
Closing the poll in about 5 seconds.
Okay.
About 69% have voted.
Okay.
Closing the poll now.
Okay.
And the results are as follows. 36%, any study that involves only existing data. 24%, any study that involves minimal risk. 18%, a primary researcher surveys children in a school setting. 12%, an anonymous survey conducted on healthy adults regarding a health issue. And 9%, studies in which participants provide informed consent.
Okay, thank you. Am I live now? Okay.
So
the poll responses have come back, and the majority of the answers were all across the board, and so it's expected as you get more familiar with it, you'll understand some of the requirements. But the first one, any study that involves only existing data, that was 36%. And so this would not be considered necessarily exempt, because you could get some information from existing data like medical records that has information like you have AIDS, cancer. So it'd be personal, private information from a person that we would want to protect. So that's not necessarily considered exempt. So that wouldn't be correct. B, you got 18% of you selected that. A primary researcher surveys school children in a school setting. It's true that a lot of things, if they're educational tests, can possibly be considered exempt. However, when you have a primary researcher that's surveying children that's like a protected group, it's a vulnerable population, and it could be anything, not necessarily educational tests. Let's say they're doing some kind of psychology test on the kids, and there could be potential for harm. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's exempt, so that wouldn't be correct. C, an anonymous survey conducted on healthy adults. It's either on a previous medical condition or a health issue. So 12% of you selected that, and this is actually the correct answer. So why this was exempt is that it's anonymous. They remove all the identifiers. So if there's not the potential to pass on sensitive information. And it's on healthy adults are not a vulnerable population. And if it's regarding a previous medical condition or health issue, that's still fine, because if the data is anonymous and there's not a potential of being spread, then that would be exempt. The important thing, though, is sometimes we get some applications coming through, they say it's anonymous, but then we find out IP addresses are being collected. So we need to make sure that clearly is anonymous, that they can't be identified. So if it's truly anonymous, this would be correct, D. And about 24% of you selected D. So anything that involves minimal risk, that would be either an exempt or an expedited study. So expedited studies also are considered minimal risk as well, so that wouldn't necessarily be exempt. And then E, which studies in which participants provide informed consent. Any study that involves active data collection will need an informed consent. So it doesn't mean whether it's exempt or expedited. So that's not going to be correct. But, this is a good opportunity to see what some of the requirements are. So I'm going to go on to the next poll question. True or false? Exempt studies do not need to be reviewed by IRB. Is that true or false? Please take time to answer the poll question.
Poll will be open for about 30 seconds.
Okay.
The poll is now closed.
Okay.
And 67% said true, 33%, or excuse me, 67% said false, 33% said true.
Okay. All right, so the poll has come back, and the majority of you got this correct. Yes, the answer will be false. Exempt studies do not need to be reviewed by the IRB. That would be false because this means that the IRB, it has to be passed through the IRB, and they review and determine whether it would be exempt. And so that means that no further review is required, but you still need to have any studies that appear to be exempt reviewed by the IRB. It just means that no additional review is needed once that's determined exempt. So going on to the next slide. So what is the process for IRB submissions? So first, you need to complete an online IRB training, and this is sponsored by NIH. They have a training called Protecting Human Research Participants, and you will receive a certificate, and this will need to be provided by the IRB starting in fall 2015. So we'll be looking for this certificate. So that would be the first step. Next step, you would be obtaining approval from the PhD director on your dissertation proposal, and this is for PhD students. So once you've gone through your defense, successfully defended your proposal, your chair has approved it, and it's also been approved by your PhD director, they will send out an email indicating that you've successfully achieved candidacy. You will receive a copy of that, and that will give the green light that you can go ahead and start the IRB application process. The third step would be completing a pre-IRB review, and this will be starting in October, and this is for the benefit of the students in trying to make the process a lot easier. I know there's been sometimes some students are not very clear about the process, so what we're trying to do is provide a link that will have some key questions that will guide you through the process so that you'll know the specific, the type of review that's likely, what kind of requirements that will be needed for your research that's based on the information you enter. So this is something to help guide you in making the process easier, and that will be starting in October. And then the next step would be to obtain permission from your study site. And so if you're, for example, having existing data, you need permission that you can access this existing data. If it's data from a medical clinic and you have medical records, we'll need approval from them. Or if you're going to be actively collecting data from a site and that you want to survey the participants, we'll need permission from that study site that you can collect it. And so usually what that involves is that on their department letterhead, they indicate that permission has been granted, and they'll indicate what's involved, understanding of the risks, any type of agreements you have with the agency, and have their signature indicating that their approval. So that's one item that's required before you submit your IRB application. And if you are collecting data directly from a site, I know we get students that are trying to do some kind of survey. They have a third party like SurveyMonkey that are collecting data for them on their behalf. They have some kind of service agreement. We just need a copy of that. So some type of permission that you are, or agreement from the site. The next step would be to submit your IRB application in TLC. And this is currently done through our e-portfolio. You can access the application there. You enter the information, and then you upload it to the new 800 course. And we do have documents available that provide detailed instructions on how to do this if you didn't attend the training a couple weeks ago. And so that's key. And due to federal guidelines, we need the documents uploaded into the IRB Dropbox rather than email because of storage of documents. The next step seems pretty simple, but it's nevertheless very important because we want you to, if you sending an email to irb@trident.edu when you upload your application, because we don't receive any kind of auto-notify, and we don't want it to be sitting there when we could be reviewing it and expediting the review of your application. So please let us know as soon as you upload your application so we can begin the review process right away. The next step, making requested revisions. Usually what happens when we get the IRB application, sometimes information is incomplete. We'll have missing items, or there could be discrepancies between different documents, or there could be lack of clarity. So that's usually the most common issues that we receive is just clarity, discrepancies, missing items. And so any kind of revisions that are being requested, they need to be made. And then the last step is receiving results of IRB review. So it may go back and forth a little bit until some of the items are addressed. Once they are addressed, you receive it back as an email when it's the final review and the final results. We'll send you a letter indicating whether it's exempt, approved, and we'll be going into the possible outcomes in another slide. So going on to the next slide. Items required for IRB review. So for all studies, we require the certificate of completion online training. That's what we discussed before, the NIH training that's online. So you get that certificate uploaded to 800 in the IRB Dropbox. You need the completed IRB application, and there's a number of areas of information that's requested. It includes information on the primary investigator and data sources, whether you're getting your data from an existing source, for example, whether it's coming from some kind of active data collection, and this helps us determine whether it's exempt or what kind of requirements are required. The study sites is another piece of information that's being asked for on there, what type of participants you're obtaining data from, and this will help us determine whether it's a vulnerable population, which they have additional requirements, and some examples of what we mean by vulnerable population. Dr. Hansen mentioned children would be a vulnerable population. There's other types of vulnerable populations, prisoners, it could be adults with some kind of disability, or it could be, even like if you are an employer and you have employees, or you're a teacher and you have students, anybody who would feel like they have some kind of undue influence or coercion on the participants, and they may not make decisions on their best interests. For example, if you're an employer and you're asking your employees to participate in a study, they might feel more pressure on it because they are the employees. So that's looked at as well, and how the participants are recruited, the risks and benefits, and whether identifiers are being collected. That's important because of the potentially sensitive information that you may be collecting. So these are some of the key elements that are asked in an IRB application. Then the next important piece is an approved research protocol or methodology. And for PhD students, this comes directly from your dissertation proposal. One of the chapter research protocol methodology should be uploaded into 800, and so we want that in its entirety. And then the data instrument, this includes all data fields from existing sources, or it can include any kind of data instruments. This may be like surveys, it could be interview questions, it could be forums, but it also includes, like, if you have existing sources, we still want to know which data fields you're being collected. It could be like a spreadsheet where you're taking that existing data on there, so that we want to know exactly what's being collected. If it's, for example, identifiers, IP addresses, what specific information you're collecting. And then the other item is permission to administer the study. We talked about that in the previous slide. That's also required for all studies. So on to the next slide. Actually, I forgot. Skipping back to this one. Required for studies involving data collection. So we need the informed consent. That's a really key piece of information. If you're doing any kind of study that involves data collection, where you're actively collecting data, you do need an informed consent. And this is required by federal regulations. They require all researchers to obtain informed consent from the subject or the subject's legally authorized representative. So there's two parts to informed consent. You want to disclose information to prospective subjects, and you also want to document the process of the subject's agreement to participate. So some of the key things that you are disclosing to the prospective subjects will be, well, first of all, you want to provide information about the study, the title of the study, the name and credentials of the researcher. So like you would say, I'm a dissertation student at Trident University, for example. Selection criteria, if your study is being randomly selected, selecting participants, you can indicate random. If you're targeting a particular population, you need to indicate so. The purpose of your study, procedures, what the participants will be expecting to go through. It's something that if you are going to participate, you put yourself in the shoes of the participant. What am I expected to do? They need to be kind of risks or discomforts that might potentially arise, the potential benefits, and they also need to be disclosed about confidentiality, specifically if the surveys or whatever information can become anonymous. If you're going to have IP addresses collected, they need to know that. If they are collecting other kinds of information, or sometimes what happens, researchers may collect some identifiers on this and they're connecting the data, cross-matching it to some other kinds of records. It could be, for example, there's some educational tests that were done, or medical records. If you're cross-matching it to some other data source, I mean, it's important to just disclose all that information. And if the study is not going to be, if identifiers are being collected, it's important to disclose how that information is going to be protected, how you are storing the data, how it's being protected. So that's very important, especially with any kind of sensitive information. And if the data, and it's also important in an informed consent to indicate that this is voluntary. They have the right to withdraw at any point. And we also need to have contact information. So that would be like information of the primary researcher, who they can contact if they have any questions, or we need contact information of either the chair of the dissertation committee or the PhD director, and then also the IRB. And then finally, a signature block that indicates that the participant agreed to participate in the study. If it's an electronic survey, e-signature would be fine for that. And it sounds like a lot. We do have an example on our website that actually has a template for an informed consent. So I would recommend that you go through and use that template as a guide. And if you have any questions on that, we're here for questions. But this is a very critical document for any kind of data that's collected, and this is something required by federal regulation when you do active data collection. So the informed consent is really key, and then we need any kind of documents used to recruit participants. For example, flyers, ads, letters, anything that you are using to recruit your participants. And just keep in mind, these are the requirements for studies involving data collection. There are other studies that may have additional requirements not included. It's not as common for some of these studies, but like, let's just say if you, there's HIPAA waiver requirements, for example, if you're doing a study involving medical records. So there are some items that are not covered specifically on this slide, but these cover the key components. And if you're doing it at another site that actually has their IRB as well, then they also need to have IRB approval. So there could be some other additional requirements besides what's here. These cover a lot of what is required. So now we come to the slide that I think is of most interest to everybody based on the poll. What criteria must be met for IRB approval? So first of all, the risk to subjects are minimized. That's the very first criteria. And all of these come from the Code of Federal Regulations. So these are exactly verbatim. So what that means, all risks to subjects are minimized. We do not expose the subjects to unnecessary risk. And so what that means, for example, we remove any kind of unnecessary procedures. And you have, for example, let's just say you're doing a study and you're collecting identifiers on the participant, but there's no need to collect identifiers. Then that should be removed, especially if it's sensitive data, because you're exposing the subject to more possible risks of their personal information being released. So if there's no need for that, we should reduce that risk. So that's what that means. If you are needing to collect identifiers, then it's important to protect that. So de-identifying the data when possible is important, coding data, and making sure that you secure the stored data. So making sure that risks to subjects are minimized, that you don't expose your subjects to any more risks that you need. And the second one, risks are reasonable in relation to benefits. So this means that, so we're looking at benefits, and so we're assuming that these studies contribute knowledge to the field, and that's why it's very important that these are approved by the PhD director, because they have reviewed your dissertation, are indicating that the methodology is strong and that it will contribute benefit to the field. And so based on that, we are examining the risk. And so if we haven't received approval from the PhD director, we don't focus as much on methodology as they do, and we want to ensure that there is benefit, and we examine those risks in relation to benefits. The third one, selection of subjects is equitable. So if your study is randomly selected, then that would indicate it's equitable. Sometimes for the purposes of certain studies, they need to target certain populations. And you should provide justification for that, why you're selecting certain populations, especially if it's a vulnerable population. You'll need to justify it, and there might be many more questions asked if it's a vulnerable population. Informed consent will be sought. We talked about that on the previous slide. It's really critical that you ask for informed consent if you're doing active data collection. Participants need to request permission from the participant, and you need to disclose all this key information that was discussed. Informed consent will be documented. Again, we said that if you need to obtain signatures and retain copies if it's written form. They should be kept separate from the rest of the data that if it's de-identified. And so the information should be, if it's electronic signature, then that would be sent for electronic survey. The next one, safety of subjects will be ensured, and this is more for clinical trials, which we don't get too much of that. So that's that one. And then the privacy of subjects will be protected and confidentiality of data will be maintained. So what we look at is why are these identifiers needed? And we try to, and if you don't need the identifiers, there's no need to expose the subjects to unnecessary risk. If it's needed, we want to see how it's protected, how you store it, how you're protecting the confidentiality and the privacy of the subjects. And then finally, safeguards against undue influence or coercion. So this is especially for, as I mentioned, vulnerable populations. If you have let's just say you're doing a study on your employees and you're the supervisor, there is a potential for that undue influence or coercion if you're the employer asking your employees to participate because they don't want to feel like there might be some kind of issue. They're feeling a little bit, there might be some more coercion. So one of the safeguards, an example of that would be to have somebody else administer that study or survey for you rather than you doing it directly if you're the employer. So these are examples where we need to put safeguards in so that there's not this undue influence. And if you're at a school and you have a bunch of children, you may have somebody representing the children that's also present. So these are the kinds of things that might be requested if there's undue influence or coercion involved. The next slide, what are the possible outcomes of an IRB review? So the first one would be exempt, and we talked about that, and what that indicates, there will be no further review needed once it's determined exempt. So you may get a letter indicating your study is exempt from further IRB review. That would be one possibility. Another possibility, and this, as we said before, would be very typical for an exempt, would be something that's like an anonymous survey where it's existing data and there's no identifiers. Those are the kinds of things that are clearly exempt because you're, if truly there's no identifiers being collected. Sometimes, though, we get proposals in and there could be a lot of demographics that any of a small population, and it's possible that when you might think it's exempt and there's not many identifiers being collected, they can somehow be tracked to that person. So we have to also check out with that to see if there's other ways to identify them or IP addresses. So that's really key to make sure that it's anonymous. And if it's truly anonymous and can't be linked back, then this would be exempt. The second one, approved. And if you get that approved, then you'll get a letter indicating that your IRB application has been approved, and usually based on the certain criteria, and you can go forward and get the green light to go forward on your study. Third is the most common first outcome you get is modifications or additional documents required. And the most common reasons for this is not really, it's mainly that information is not, there's missing documents, there's discrepancies or lack of clarity. So these are the most common reasons that things that see modifications. So it's really important if you want your IRB review to go quickly that you have all the items completed, no discrepancies, everything's clear and concise, and that will help speed up the IRB process. The fourth one, deferred until full IRB committee review. And this is not very common. We don't get a lot that have a lot of, this is when it requires more than minimal risk. And so we don't get a lot of them coming through, but it's possible, and we would have, what that means is that we would have a full committee IRB meeting to discuss your IRB application. So you wait for the following meeting, and we meet on a monthly basis. So once we discuss your IRB application, then we come back to you with the results of that based on all members reviewing your application. And then the final one is disapproved, and this is not common either. It's rare, but it's only if, generally, if your study site did not approve your study. That's where we most commonly have this occur, but it's a pretty rare outcome. Going on to the poll question, which of the following is an example of minimizing risks to subjects? A, not collecting personal identifiers from subjects when sensitive data is being collected. B, having a teacher present when a researcher is interviewing children. C, both A and B. D, neither A or B. So please take time to answer the poll question.
The poll will be closed in about 10 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, we have about 80% who have voted closing poll now.
Okay.
And the results are both at 44%, not collecting personal identifiers from subjects, and 44% also chose both A and B. 9% neither A and B, and 3% having a teacher present when interviewing children.
Okay. All right, so the polls come back, and a lot of you have got this correct. The answer would be 44% of you selected both A and B, which is the correct answer, and some of you, 44%, selected not collecting personal identifiers from subjects, and that is correct. That's correct, as well as B, having a teacher present when a researcher is interviewing children. So the not collecting personal identifiers, that's the reason that is true is because, of course, when you don't collect personal identifiers, there's limited chance of your information, personal information from subjects being released. So that would be why that's correct. Having a teacher present when a researcher is interviewing children, that minimizes risk because the children are in a vulnerable population, and so there's potential for being coercion or undue risk. So having a teacher present helps. It's like a representative of the children, and it helps minimize that risk to the children, any kind of undue influence. So that could be also considered an example of minimizing risk. Going on to the next poll question. Which of the following does not apply for informed consent? A, subject or legal representative must give consent. B, language must be 8th grade level. C, coercion must be avoided or minimized. D, it must disclose purpose, benefits, risks, procedures, how confidentiality will be maintained. Or E, none of the above. So please take time to answer the poll question.
We have about 10 more seconds until the poll is closed.
Okay.
Poll is closed now. The results are up on the screen for the participants. 44% is the most popular answer. Language must be 8th grade level. Coming in next at 26%, none of the above. At the third tied at at 12%, coercion must be avoided or minimized, and also it must disclose how confidentiality will be maintained. And 6%, subject or legal representative must give consent.
Okay. All right, thank you all for participating in the poll. Looks like a lot of you have got it correct, but the first one, 6% of you said subject or legal representative must give consent. This is required, and so this would not be correct. It is required that either the subject or legal representative must give consent on an informed consent. B, language must be 8th grade level. This is correct as well. It needs to be very clear and understandable and written at an 8th grade level, so this will be also required. 12% of you said coercion must be avoided or minimized. This also applies for an informed consent, so this would be incorrect. The D, and I know it states slightly different on the poll because of the words are limited, but it doesn't change the response. You need to disclose purpose, benefits, risks, procedures, how confidentiality will be maintained. So this is incorrect. So the answer would be, and 26% of you got this, of the second largest of the group, none of the above. So all of this information in A through D is important to include in the informed consent. So, so that would be the answer for this poll question. So going on to the summary. So the primary purpose of the IRB is to protect the rights and welfare of human subjects. These are some of the key takeaway messages we're presenting in the summary. The federal regulations require IRB review for all research involving human subjects. And keep in mind, as we said before, that it also includes existing data that contains information on these human subjects, whether it's obtained directly or indirectly. And third point, 3 different types of IRB review that we have. We have exempt reviews, and this, as we said, usually involves studies that don't include identifiers and no sensitive information is being collected. Or it could be an expedited review, and these reviews are generally faster. Usually what happens with an expedited review, we have a primary person that reviews in our committee that reviews the IRB application and takes lead and does the review and passes it on back to me. So that's an expedited review. The full review involves the whole entire IRB committee, and it usually involves waiting to the next meeting, and all members review the application and they'll vote on the IRB application and whether anything additional is required for that. So these are the different types of IRB review. The next point here, key documents required for all studies are the Certificate of Completion of Online IRB Training. The second one would be the completed IRB application that you can get at your ePortfolio. Third is approved research methodology that you have from your dissertation proposal in its entirety for all data instruments. And keep in mind, even existing data, you should be providing the specific data fields that you are collecting for that as well. And then by permission to administer the study. And the key criteria that must be met for IRB approval, clear documentation on how risk subjects are minimized, and informed consent that includes required items if you have data collection. So these are some of the key takeaway messages.
Thank you very much, Drs. Hansen and Sato. I'm very, very grateful for your outstanding presentation. I'm now going to ask our participants to start developing their questions if you haven't done so already, as there will be time at the end for you to ask your questions. I'm now going to give a brief overview of C.O.R.E. If you can go to the next slide, please. We do have a new C.O.R.E. webpage launch, which I'm very pleased to announce. For those unfamiliar with C.O.R.E., C.O.R.E. is the Culture of Research and Education webinar series, and it's an innovative and wide-ranging series designed to provide continuing education, academic and professional development for prospective students, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral students, faculty, alumni, professionals, and the general public. And as mentioned before, we have launched a new web page, and you may access the most updated information by visiting www.trident.edu/webinars/core to sign up for information about an upcoming webinar. Next slide, please. Also, in the fall 2015, we have a number of very exciting series lined up for you. This is a snapshot of some of our upcoming talks from September through December 2015, which will include Directors and Professors Roundtable, How to Critically Review a Research Article, May the Statistical Power Be With You, How to Write Your Research and Teaching Philosophies for Jobs in Academia. Next slide, please. As well as a citation tools workshop, an overview of qualitative research methodology, and lastly, in December, an APA formatting workshop for your research. Next slide, please. And it's also my pleasure to announce C.O.R.E Grand Rounds, which will be coming in January 2016. So if you have ever wanted to have a platform to present your ongoing scholarly and professional work to a general audience, you will be able to receive constructive feedback from peers and scholars in training through C.O.R.E Grand Rounds. So if you are interested in signing up for our 2016 slots, please email me at bernice.ramala@trident.edu to sign up. And to receive, next slide, please. And to receive more information about C.O.R.E, please visit the C.O.R.E webpage at trident.edu/webinars/core. And if you or if you have some colleagues who are interested in our doctoral programs at C.O.R.E at Trident University in educational leadership, business, and health sciences, please visit www.trident.edu/degrees/doctoral. And of course, if you have any comments for C.O.R.E, you may email it to me at bernice.ramala@trident.edu. Next slide, please. And so we will now open the floor for questions.
Sure. We have several questions in already, and a number of people have asked this question, so I'm going to get this one out of the way early. Does every PhD dissertation proposal need to be reviewed by the IRB?
Okay, this is Dr. Hansen. I'll take that one. The answer to that is kind of simple. It's just a simple yes. And you really, we have to make sure that no data is collected until after the IRB has given their go-ahead. So once your dissertation proposal defense is finished and you've passed your dissertation proposal defense, next step is IRB review.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Hansen. Next question, which also was asked by a few people. What are the most common items that need to be addressed following an IRB review?
Okay, let me take that one again, too. Usually what we have are missing items. For example, the researcher will not have provided us with a copy of the consent from the study site, or the informed consent might be missing, things like that. Oftentimes there'll be discrepancies because, you know, there's a lot of work involved in doing a dissertation proposal and putting together your research plan and everything. So a researcher may, in their research plan, say that they're going to study one subject group, but then in another, in their informed consent, it looks like it's a different group. Or so these sort of inconsistencies, or the letter of approval that they've gotten from the subject site says that the researcher may do, you know, one type of research with a certain group, but then the rest of the proposal talks about another group. And usually this is things that have happened as the research has developed over time. So my tip would be, you know, just to review all the documents that you submit for consistency and to use the checklist that the IRB is providing to make sure that you have submitted every document. And, you know, we check carefully the informed consents, and that's often one that has to be revised because it doesn't contain all the information. It's not as self-explanatory. It's not written at the proper language level. So these are some of the things that often happen you know, on the way to approval. And usually things get worked out quickly, and then we move on.
Great, thank you. Next question. What are consequences if data is collected without IRB approval?
So I'll take this one. The items that the consequences, this comes from the federal regulations and the guidelines that we have. Suspension of the research project is one option that could occur. Inability to use the data or publish results. Notification of regulatory agencies of non-compliance. We'd have to notify them depending on how much, if there was, actually, if there was any kind of risk or some kind of something that occurred, we would need to disclose that to the regulatory agencies. Inability to receive future funding from federal grants. Additional monitoring or oversight by the IRB or third party, and possible termination of research. So these are items that, these are based on guidelines, policies from federal regulations. We try to address these before these come on. I know sometimes it's just there was a lack of clarity, and we try to fix it and work with the student on issues like that. But it's really critical because when we're studying human subjects, we need to follow regulations. We need to take this very seriously. If there's some kind of study involving vulnerable subjects and some harm is done, we have to disclose this to different people and regulatory agencies. I mean, there's been examples where I know at some schools that they actually had to terminate their whole research. So we take this very seriously, and it's very important to just to work together and have good communication just to make sure that we're on track and following federal regulations.
Great, thank you. Next question. What are the requirements that need to be met before submitting an IRB application?
So the requirements are, first you need to, again, complete the IRB training, online IRB training. There's that link that we provided by NIH, and to provide that certificate, and then having your dissertation proposal approved by the PhD director. That gives us the green light that you can move forward on that. And then we're going to have a pre-IRB review that's going to be available in October that will help guide you through the process. And that would be also helpful and important so that you can actually make sure you address all the items that should help expedite and make sure that you're on target when you submit. And then obtaining any permission from your study site that's required. So these are the key things.
Great, thank you. Next question. Does faculty research need to go through IRB? And also, if the project involves another university, will it be sufficient that the IRB is obtained from another school, or will another IRB be submitted to Trident as well?
Yeah, I could take that one. If there's another IRB at another site, we do require that IRB is, we need IRB approval from that site. But it's not sufficient just to have one site. We usually ask for that IRB, and what happens sometimes is they might ask for our IRB approval before they approve, or we might ask vice versa. So usually if they want our IRB approval, we may give you a contingent based on their approval. So that's what happens, but both IRBs need to approve the research. And the first question about faculty research, yeah, all members of Trident, whether you're a student, faculty, or student, faculty, or staff, all of any kind of research must go through our IRB. So yes, the answer would be yes for that one.
And let me just add, if in doubt, submit it to the IRB. So.
Great, thank you. Next question here. This is a longer question. We have a participant. They're conducting their research overseas, and the research site does not have an IRB protocol in place. There is only a written approval from the hospital management to conduct the research. how would I go about getting an IRB approval for my research? Yeah, that's the end of the question.
Okay. Well, if they are a faculty or a student or a staff member that's conducting the research, then they could go through our IRB. And if there's no IRB at the other site, then it would be based just on our IRB. So, and then we would require the same sort of things that we did ask for. If it was a student, you need to have the permission from the study site that they indicate you have permission for them to collect the data and provide your methodology just as well. So it would be similar requirements. But yeah, if it's not, they don't have IRB, then it would just be based on our IRB.
Okay, great. Next question. If I am conducting the research as a certified teacher, is that allowable and deemed as minimal risk? And if so, then where is my system of checks and balances when dealing with my own students for my research?
Okay, well, I think one thing that we have to watch out for is when a teacher is conducting research on his or her own students is the undue coercion factor. And so in a situation like that, most probably what we would do is request that someone else, let's say, administer the instrument rather than the teacher himself. So the check and balance is we look at the way the research is administered and how it's done to minimize the undue coercion possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dr. Hansen brought up a good point, and it's good that you mentioned certified, and we do look at the qualifications of the teacher because that helps in also evaluating and seeing that they have qualifications, that they won't pose more risk, and certifications are important.
And this actually appears to be the last question. How likely is an IRB to be approved by an organization, provided the IRB is reasonable?
So how likely is the IRB to be approved by the organization? You mean by Trident, or by, you're talking about another?
I think this is just a general organization.
How likely is it to be approved by another organization?
The organization is used in a general sense, this question.
Well, I'll try to answer the best as I understand it. I mean, if you're talking about another organization, they have their own requirements, but we're all based on certain federal requirements. So I think it's likely if we approve it that the other place will also approve it, but sometimes there's like different levels. People interpret things differently, so there could be some variation, but there's always a similar requirements. And if you're looking at how likely it is to be approved, usually what happens, I mean, if it's a good study and you follow all of, and you address all the issues and you get permission, you follow all the dot your I's, cross your T's, follow all the requirements, I mean, it'll eventually get to that point where it gets approved eventually once you address those things. So I'm not sure if that addresses.
I think that's true. And then also if there are, it sounds like they're asking what would happen if one IRB approved it and another IRB didn't approve it. And I think that generally we would try to work that out in terms of, what is it that the one IRB might be objecting to. And since we are all guided by these federal regulations that are relatively clear, it rarely happens that, people would not be able to conform to both IRBs. So, we've had sometimes where there was where an IRB has been approved at the study site, but we still had some questions or something like that, or wanted further clarification. But it wasn't really something that impeded the researcher. They just went ahead and conformed to what we wanted in addition to what the other one wanted. And that's the way it has to be is, if the study site has an IRB that needs to approve, we need to get that approval in addition to the Trident approval.
And Dr. Hansen touched on an important point where I think sometimes it might be really clear to one site what they're doing. The other site, maybe the information seems different and they're not quite sure what we're based on, whatever information we're reading from whatever the student provides or the researcher provides, and if we're not clear on something, or if it's not really, it may be that it just needs to be clarified, and maybe, they'll be on the same page. Because sometimes there's been studies that actually, if it was very clear what was being done, then it would be going through a green light on it. So part of it is, making sure that your study is very clear what you are doing. I think we can't emphasize that enough.
Right, and if I could think of an example in that particular situation, it might be that the researcher has gotten approval for a study, but through the process of going through their dissertation, proposal defense and everything, they've really changed the study a little bit, or the subjects a little bit, or something like that. And so they have the approval from the other site, but it's not exactly the same study. So we have to also be alert to that kind of thing to make sure that everybody's approving everything as it is, at the time that the research is ready to go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. And one more question just came in, and that is, what is the turnaround time for an application to be approved?
Yeah, okay, so usually when you first submit your IRB application, and it also depends whether it turns out it looks like it's exempt or expedited full review, that makes a big difference. But if it's clearly exempt, and when I'm saying clearly exempt is sometimes things are not written very clearly at the first time that if it's exempt, it might not be very clear on first review. But if it's clearly exempt, this could be probably, I'd say most likely within a week that you could get that back, or even sooner, depending on. But if it's on your first review, I would say for most reviews, it'd be 1 to 2 weeks to get some information back on what's your on the results of the first review of your application. But if there are items that need to be addressed, keep in mind that you'll need to resubmit and address those items. And usually once you've done your first one and you haven't made modifications where you're addressing those items, the reviews should be a little bit faster to turn around. So probably within about a week after you submit something. So it's hard to estimate exactly when it will be approved, because a lot of it depends on you addressing these items, just like your dissertation proposal, and you're getting that approved. So if these items are addressed quickly, we try to turn this around as quickly as possible. So for the first review, I'd say 1 to 2 weeks, but if it's exempt, it's probably a week or less is usually what happens if it's really clear and very simple, straightforward. But if it's, takes more, follow-up reviews are usually faster.
Yeah, and if I could just add, on the process, I think it's important to remember to submit an email to the IRB committee when you complete you've submitted all your documents online. That gives us kind of 2 alerts to the fact that you think your IRB proposal is ready for review. So don't leave out that step 6 in the process of sending an email to the IRB committee, letting them know that your documents are ready for review.
We don't want it to sit around. We'd like to start the review right away, because that's caused unnecessary delays sometimes. And the other thing, too, we do have outside external committee members. So some of these get reviewed, like we said, with the expedited. Certain members take lead on it, and if it's an external member, they need a certain amount of lead time, too. So that's why we always have like 1 to 2 weeks for a lot of them. But it should be much faster for the follow-up reviews, probably, or the exempt ones should be quicker.
Great, thank you. And that's all we have with the questions for today.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sato and Dr. Hansen, for your outstanding presentation. I know that there are many members who are not affiliated with Trident on this webinar, but if you are affiliated with Trident and you have further questions, you can see the contact information on the last slide. And we are looking forward to seeing you at a future webinar. And many thanks to our moderator, Mr. Daniel Sloan, for helping to moderate this webinar. Thank you very much all, and we will see you at our next C.O.R.E. webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.